The opportunity to clean the home of a global celebrity like Sean Combs, known to the world as Diddy, felt surreal when it first came to me. It was a random, unsuspecting Tuesday when my boss at the cleaning service called me into her office, wearing an uncharacteristic grin that bordered on smugness. She told me Diddy's estate management had specifically requested our company for a one-time deep clean assignment. "He's particular," she warned me, her eyes narrowing behind her wire-rimmed glasses. "Everything has to be spotless. Perfect. Can you handle that?" Before we start, hit the like and subscribe buttons for more exclusive news. I nodded eagerly. The chance to get a glimpse inside the life of a music mogul was too tantalizing to pass up, even if it meant scrubbing baseboards or vacuuming under designer sofas. Yet nothing could have prepared me for what I was about to experience in that house. The moment I pulled up to the sprawling estate on the outskirts of Beverly Hills, a strange sense of unease settled in my stomach. The house was enormous, with sleek modern architecture and floor-to-ceiling windows that reflected the sun like mirrors. It should have looked inviting, glamorous even, but there was something cold and intimidating about it. It felt too perfect, as if the house itself were watching me, waiting. A man in a tailored black suit greeted me at the door. He didn't smile. He didn't introduce himself. He simply instructed me to follow him inside. The interior was just as pristine as the exterior. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, furniture that looked like it belonged in an art museum. Everything smelled faintly of cedar and something else I couldn't quite place, something almost metallic. The man handed me a list of tasks and disappeared without another word. The first item on the list was straightforward: clean the guest bedrooms. There were 6 of them, each one more luxurious than the last, and it took me hours to dust the shelves, fluff the pillows, and vacuum the plush cream-colored carpets. By the time I reached the last bedroom, the sun had started to dip below the horizon, casting long, eerie shadows across the house. That was when I noticed the first strange thing. As I adjusted the throw pillows on the bed, I saw a picture frame on the nightstand. Inside was a photo of a woman I didn't recognize, her face partially obscured by a shadow. At first I thought it was just the angle of the light, but when I moved the frame to get a better look, the shadow seemed to shift with it, always keeping her face hidden. I tried not to think too much about it, chalking it up to my imagination, but a chill ran down my spine as I left the room. The next item on the list was to clean the kitchen. It was immaculate, as if no one had ever cooked a meal there. Yet the list specifically requested a deep clean. As I scrubbed the countertops, I noticed a large wooden cutting board sitting in the sink. It had deep grooves etched into the surface, almost like claw marks. There were dark stains in the grooves, and no matter how hard I scrubbed, they wouldn't come out. The harder I tried, the more it felt like the board was resisting me, as if it didn't want to be cleaned. I left the cutting board alone and moved on to the refrigerator. Inside, there was nothing but bottled water, champagne, and a single plate of half-eaten food covered in plastic wrap. The food looked old, the edges of the meat curling and gray, yet there was no smell, no sign of spoilage. I quickly shut the refrigerator door and turned my attention to the oven. It was around that time that I started hearing the noises. At first, they were faint, soft footsteps echoing down the hallway, the distant sound of a door creaking open. I told myself it was just the house settling, or maybe the suited man going about his business. But when I paused to listen, the sounds stopped, as if they were deliberately avoiding detection. By the time I finished the kitchen, it was dark outside. The house felt different at night, its sharp lines and glossy surfaces taking on an almost menacing quality. I had 3 rooms left to clean: the library, the home theater, and the master bedroom. I decided to tackle the library first, figuring it would be the least intimidating of the 3. The library was enormous, with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and a rolling ladder that looked like it belonged in an old European manor. The air was heavy with the smell of aged paper and leather bindings. As I dusted the shelves, I couldn't help but notice how many of the books didn't have titles on their spines. Some were completely blank, while others had strange symbols I didn't recognize. One book in particular caught my attention. Its cover was made of dark cracked leather, and there was no title, no author, just a single word embossed in gold lettering: lament. Against my better judgment, I opened it. The pages were filled with intricate hand-drawn illustrations of faces, dozens of them, all twisted in expressions of anguish and despair. Some of the faces looked disturbingly familiar, though I couldn't place where I'd seen them before. As I flipped through the book, I thought I heard whispers, faint and indistinct, as if the room itself were breathing down my neck. I slammed the book shut and put it back on the shelf, my hands trembling. I told myself it was just a trick of my mind, a result of being alone in such an eerie place. But as I turned to leave the library, I saw something out of the corner of my eye, a figure standing in the doorway. It was gone the moment I looked directly at it, but the image burned into my mind. Tall, shadowy, with eyes that glinted like polished obsidian. I wanted to leave. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to walk out the door and never come back, but I couldn't. My boss had made it clear that this job was important, that failing to complete it would have serious consequences for our company. So I forced myself to move on to the home theater. The theater was unsettling in its own way. Rows of leather recliners faced a massive screen, the walls lined with soundproofing panels that seemed to absorb every sound I made. As I vacuumed the carpet, I noticed one of the chairs was slightly reclined, as if someone had been sitting there recently. The air around the chair was noticeably colder than the rest of the room, and when I leaned in to adjust it, I thought I heard breathing, slow, steady, right behind me. I whipped around, but the room was empty. My heart pounded as I quickly finished cleaning and made my way to the final room, the master bedroom. The bedroom was unlike anything I'd ever seen. Massive, with a bed that could have easily fit a family of 4. The walls were lined with floor-to-ceiling mirrors, which only added to the unsettling atmosphere. As I dusted the nightstands, I noticed a strange object sitting on one of them, a small, intricately carved box made of dark wood. It looked ancient, its surface worn smooth from years of handling. Against my better judgment, I opened it. Inside was a collection of objects: a tarnished locket, a folded piece of yellowed paper, and a single black feather. The locket wouldn't open no matter how hard I tried, and the paper was blank except for a single word scrawled in shaky handwriting: beware. The feather felt unnaturally heavy, as if it were made of metal rather than something organic. As I placed the objects back in the box, the mirrors on the walls seemed to shimmer, their reflections warping and twisting. I saw my own reflection staring back at me, but it wasn't quite right. My face looked pale and gaunt, my eyes sunken and hollow. And then, just for a moment, I saw something else in the mirror, a shadowy figure standing behind me, its hand reaching out for my shoulder. I spun around, but the room was empty. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the cleaning supplies. I wanted to scream, to run, but my legs felt like lead. I don't remember how I finished cleaning that room. All I know is that by the time I stumbled out of the house, the sky was starting to lighten, the first hints of dawn breaking over the horizon. The man in the suit was waiting for me by the door. He didn't ask if I was okay, didn't acknowledge the terror written all over my face. He simply handed me an envelope and said, "Thank you for your service." I didn't open the envelope until I was safely back in my car. Inside was a stack of crisp $100 bills, more money than I'd ever made in a single day. I should have felt relieved, even grateful, but all I felt was dread. Something in that house had marked me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd brought it home with me. That night, as I tried to sleep, I heard whispers in the dark, faint and indistinct, just like in the library. And when I looked in the mirror, my reflection didn't look quite right. Cleaning Diddy's house was supposed to be an extraordinary opportunity, a glimpse into the life of a music legend. Instead, it became a nightmare I can't escape. I don't know what's worse, the things I saw in that house, or the fear that they're still with me, waiting for the right moment to reveal themselves. After leaving Diddy's house, I spent the next few days trying to convince myself that what I'd experienced was nothing more than an overactive imagination. The mind has a way of playing tricks when you're in unfamiliar surroundings, especially in a house that exudes such an unnerving energy. But no matter how hard I tried to rationalize it, the strange events refused to fade from my memory. The shadows, the whispers, the objects in the carved box, everything felt too vivid, too real to dismiss as simple paranoia. It started subtly at first. My dreams, which had always been mundane, Forgotten images of people I didn't recognize or scenarios too bland to hold any significance became disturbingly vivid. The house crept into my subconscious. Every night I found myself wandering its endless hallways, each step echoing unnaturally loud. I'd open doors to find rooms that hadn't been there during my cleaning. A ballroom with chandeliers swaying as if caught in an invisible storm. A nursery filled with faceless dolls. A cellar with stairs descending into pitch-black nothingness. But the worst part wasn't the house itself, it was the figure. The shadowy, glint-eyed figure from the library and master bedroom began appearing in these dreams, always at the edge of my vision. It never spoke, never moved toward me, but its presence was suffocating. I'd wake up gasping for breath, drenched in sweat, my heart pounding so violently I was convinced I was seconds away from a heart attack. The nights blurred into days, and even when awake, I couldn't escape the feeling that I was being watched. Every creak of the floorboards in my apartment made me jump. Every unexpected shadow thrown by the setting sun set my nerves on edge. I started keeping the lights on at all hours, desperate to banish the darkness. But light offered no comfort. The longer I tried to suppress the memories, the more persistent they became. One night after another sleepless stretch of tossing and turning, I decided I needed answers. Perhaps understanding what had happened in that house, what made it feel so wrong, would help me put my mind at ease. I searched online for anything I could find about Diddy's estate, hoping to uncover some piece of its history, maybe even a rumor or urban legend that would explain the eerie atmosphere. My search turned up surprisingly little. Articles praised the estate's design, applauding its modernity and luxury, but there were no mentions of hauntings, tragedies, or anything out of the ordinary. Frustrated, I expanded my search, diving into forums, message boards, and obscure blogs. Eventually, I stumbled upon a post from a user who claimed to have been a contractor working on the house during its construction. The post was short and riddled with typos, but one line stood out. There were places in that house we weren't allowed to touch, rooms that didn't make sense, like they were built for something else. I messaged the user, but the account was inactive. The last post dated over 5 years ago. Still, the cryptic statement lingered in my mind. Rooms that didn't make sense. I thought back to the strange layout of the house, how it had felt like a maze even though it wasn't particularly large. I remembered the photo in the guest bedroom, the untitled books in the library, the cutting board with those deep claw-like grooves. Everything about that house defied explanation. As days turned into weeks, I began to feel like I was losing my grip on reality. The whispers followed me everywhere. Not loud enough to understand, but constant enough to unsettle. My reflection in the mirror seemed off. Subtle at first, but the more I stared, the more I noticed the differences. The slight delay in its movements, the way its expression didn't quite match my own. At night, I'd hear footsteps pacing in the hallway outside my bedroom, but when I checked, no one was there. Desperate, I confided in a friend, Alex, someone I'd known since college and who had always been a skeptic. I didn't expect him to believe me, but I needed to tell someone, anyone, before the weight of it all crushed me. "You're stressed," he said, sipping his coffee as we sat in a small cafe. "This is all in your head. You cleaned a rich guy's house and now your brain's running wild. Maybe it was creepy, sure, but haunted? Come on." I wanted to argue, to insist that what I was experiencing couldn't be explained away so easily, but the look on his face told me it was pointless. Still, Alex offered a suggestion. Maybe go see a psychic or something. Not that I believe in that crap, but if it'll make you feel better, why not? I hated the idea of turning to someone I would have previously considered a con artist, but I was desperate. The next day, I found myself sitting in a small, dimly lit shop that smelled of incense and herbs. The woman who greeted me was older, her gray hair tied back in a loose bun. She didn't ask for details about why I was there, simply gestured for me to sit at a round table draped in a velvet cloth. "You've brought something with you," she said almost immediately, her voice low and serious. "Not a physical object, but an energy. It's strong and it's not friendly." My skin prickled. I hadn't told her anything about the house or my experiences. "Can you help me?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She nodded, though her expression was grim. "I can try, but whatever this is, it's not just attached to you. It's anchored to where it came from." She performed a cleansing ritual, burning sage and muttering prayers I didn't recognize. For a brief moment, I felt lighter, as if a weight had been lifted from my chest. But as I left the shop, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was following me, lurking just out of sight. That night, the dreams returned, more vivid and terrifying than ever. This time, the shadowy figure spoke. Its voice was low and guttural, each word sending shivers down my spine. "You opened the door," it said. "You let me in." I woke up screaming, my throat raw and my body drenched in sweat. The next morning, I noticed scratches on my arms, thin red lines that hadn't been there the night before. I tried to convince myself that I'd scratched myself in my sleep, but deep down, I knew the truth. The next few days were a blur of paranoia and sleepless nights. The whispers grew louder, the reflections in the mirror more distorted. Objects in my apartment began moving on their own, small things at first, like a pen rolling off the table or a door creaking open, but soon it escalated. One night, I came home to find my furniture rearranged, the words, "You can't escape," scrawled on the wall in what looked like ash. I knew I couldn't go on like this. Whatever I'd brought back from that house wasn't going to leave on its own. It wanted something, and I had to figure out what. In a moment of desperation, I returned to the house. It was a foolish decision, but I felt like I had no other choice. If I wanted answers, I needed to confront whatever was hiding within those walls. The house was just as I remembered it, cold, pristine, and unwelcoming. The suited man was gone, the door unlocked. As I stepped inside, the air seemed to grow heavier, pressing down on my chest. I retraced my steps, moving through the rooms I had cleaned weeks earlier. Each one felt different now, as if the house itself was alive and aware of my presence. When I reached the master bedroom, I hesitated. The mirrors on the walls reflected not just the room, but shadows that didn't belong, twisted, writhing shapes that moved independently of anything in the room. The carved box was still on the nightstand, its lid slightly ajar. Summoning every ounce of courage I had, I opened the box. The objects were still inside, but this time, there was something new. A photograph of me, taken in the very moment I had opened the box during my first visit. My blood ran cold. I hadn't noticed a camera in the room, and there was no logical explanation for how the photo could exist. As I stared at the photo, the whispers became deafening, a cacophony of voices overlapping and blending into an incomprehensible roar. The mirrors around me shattered, shards of glass flying in all directions. I dropped the box and ran, my heart pounding as I navigated the maze-like hallways. The house seemed to shift around me, doors leading to rooms I didn't recognize, hallways stretching endlessly. When I finally stumbled out into the night, gasping for air, the house loomed behind me, its windows dark and lifeless. I didn't look back as I drove away, my hands trembling on the wheel. Even now, weeks later, I can't shake the feeling that the house isn't done with me. The whispers have quieted, but they're still there, lurking at the edges of my consciousness. Every so often, I catch a glimpse of something in the corner of my eye, a shadow that disappears the moment I turn to look. I've moved to a new apartment, changed my phone number, even considered quitting my job. But deep down, I know it won't make a difference. Whatever I encountered in that house is with me now, a part of me. And no matter how far I run, I can't escape it. After the incident at Diddy's house, I became consumed by a need to understand the presence that had attached itself to me. The fear hadn't left me. It was a constant companion, lingering at the edges of my mind. Every creak in my apartment, every flicker of light felt like a signal that something was still watching, waiting. But alongside the fear was a gnawing curiosity. I needed to know what I had disturbed, why it had chosen me, and most importantly, if I could get rid of it. My search for answers began with books. Libraries, bookstores, and the dark corners of the internet became my sanctuaries as I pored over texts on hauntings, the occult, and cursed objects. I even ventured into folklore and myth, desperate for any clue that might explain what I had experienced. What struck me as odd was how fragmented the information felt. Every source seemed to offer pieces of a puzzle, but none fit together neatly. One recurring theme, however, caught my attention: the idea of thresholds. Many traditions, I learned, believed that spirits or entities needed an invitation to cross into someone's life. The phrase the shadowy figure had spoken in my dream, "You opened the door," reverberated in my mind. Could I have inadvertently given it permission to follow me? If so, what door had I opened? I decided to revisit the strange carved box from the master bedroom. Not physically, I wouldn't dare return to that house, but mentally retracing my steps and trying to recall every detail about it. The locket, the feather, the note with "Beware" scrawled across it. What did it all mean? The objects felt deliberately chosen, as though each carried a piece of the story I was meant to unravel. The locket haunted me the most. It wouldn't open when I tried, but the idea that it contained something, a photograph, a message, or perhaps something worse, kept nagging at me. I sketched it from memory, noting its intricate design, and began searching online for anything similar. Hours of digging finally led me to a forum dedicated to antique jewelry. One user identified the style as Victorian mourning jewelry, often used to hold a lock of hair or a photograph of a deceased loved one. The connection sent shivers down my spine. Mourning jewelry wasn't just a keepsake, it was deeply tied to grief, and sometimes to spiritual practices meant to maintain a bond with the dead. Had the locket once belonged to someone who refused to let go of their loss? Or worse, had it been used in some kind of ritual? Encouraged by this lead, I reached out to a local historian who specialized in Victorian-era artifacts. She was skeptical at first, but when I described the locket and its potential origins, her tone shifted. If it's genuine, she said, it's not just a piece of jewelry. Mourning lockets often carried intense emotional weight. People believed they could tether memories, or even souls, to the living world. Her words stayed with me long after our conversation ended. If the locket was a tether, what had it anchored? And had my curiosity, the act of opening the box, reawakened something that should have stayed dormant? The next step in my investigation was more direct, though infinitely more dangerous. I needed to confront the entity. Every resource I consulted agreed on one point. Fear fed these kinds of presences, strengthening their hold. Ignoring it, however, was just as risky, as it allowed the connection to deepen unchecked. The only solution was to address it directly to demand answers. To prepare, I reached out to a paranormal investigator named Clara, whose reputation I'd stumbled upon during my research. Clara wasn't what I expected. No theatrics, no talk of ghosts as entertainment. She was practical, grounded, and deeply serious about her work. When I told her about my experiences, she didn't laugh or dismiss me. Instead, she nodded thoughtfully and agreed to help. When she arrived at my apartment, she carried an arsenal of tools, EMF detectors, infrared cameras, and a small satchel of items she described as protective measures. She spent hours setting up equipment, asking me questions, and mapping out the timeline of events. "You said it started after you opened the box?" she asked, her tone sharp. I nodded. "That's when the dreams began, and the whispers." Clara frowned. "You didn't just disturb something, you activated it. Whatever was tied to that box, it saw an opportunity and it took it." Her explanation made a dreadful kind of sense. The presence hadn't chosen me randomly. It had been waiting, dormant, until someone gave it the attention it needed to latch on. And I had been that someone. That night, Clara conducted what she called a confrontation session. We sat in the middle of my living room, surrounded by protective charms and candles. Clara instructed me to speak aloud, addressing the presence directly. My voice trembled as I began. "Who are you? What do you want from me?" The room grew colder, the air thick with tension. Clara's equipment began to beep, the EMF detector spiking erratically. The candles flickered, their flames bending unnaturally as if an unseen wind was whipping through the room. A sound like static filled the air, followed by a deep guttural voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "You invited me," it said, each word dragging like nails across a chalkboard. "You opened what was closed. Now I am free." I felt a wave of nausea, my chest tightening as though a heavy weight was pressing down on me. Clara sprang into action, chanting something under her breath while sprinkling a fine white powder around us. The pressure in the room eased slightly, but the presence didn't leave. Instead, it began to laugh, a low, hollow sound that made my skin crawl. "What do you want?" Clara demanded, her voice steady despite the chaos around us. The laughter stopped abruptly. "To return," the voice said, "to what was mine." Clara shot me a glance, her eyes narrowing. "What did you touch in that house?" she asked, her tone urgent. I stammered, trying to explain the carved box, the objects inside, and the strange photograph of me. Clara's expression darkened. "That box wasn't just a container," she said. "It was a seal, a binding, and you broke it." Before I could respond, the presence spoke again, its voice rising to a deafening roar. "You cannot undo what is done. The door is open." The room erupted into chaos. The candles extinguished themselves, plunging us into darkness. Furniture rattled violently, books flying off shelves. Clara grabbed my arm, pulling me to my feet. "We need to leave, now!" We fled the apartment, stumbling into the cold night air. Clara didn't speak until we were a safe distance away, her face pale and drawn. "You've unleashed something ancient," she said, her voice shaking. "Something that doesn't belong in this world." For the next few days, I stayed with Clara, too afraid to return to my apartment. She enlisted the help of other investigators, forming a team to figure out how to contain the entity. They performed rituals, burned sage, and placed protective wards around me. But the presence remained relentless. One night, as I lay awake in Clara's guest room, I heard the whispers again. They were faint but unmistakable, crawling under my skin like a fever. I sat up, my heart racing, and saw a shadowy figure standing in the corner of the room. Its eyes glinted like polished obsidian, just as they had in Diddy's house. "You cannot run," it said, its voice a chilling echo. I scrambled out of bed, shouting for Clara. By the time she arrived, the figure was gone, but the room felt impossibly cold. Clara's face was grim as she inspected the space. "It's getting stronger," she said. "And it's not just tied to you anymore. It's spreading." Her words filled me with dread. I had hoped this nightmare was contained to my life, but now it was clear that the presence was growing, feeding off the fear and chaos it created. The thought of it harming others, Clara, her team, anyone who came near me, was unbearable. We needed a permanent solution, and fast. Clara suggested one last desperate measure, returning to Diddy's house to reseal the box. The idea terrified me, but I knew it was the only way to end this. The following night, we gathered our supplies and made our way to the estate. The house loomed in the darkness, its windows like empty eyes staring back at us. As we stepped inside, the oppressive energy hit me like a wave, stronger than ever before. The house seemed alive, its walls pulsing and groaning as we made our way to the master bedroom. When we reached the room, the carved box was still there, its lid slightly ajar. Clara instructed me to place the objects back inside exactly as I'd found them, then close the lid. My hands shook as I followed her instructions, the whispers growing louder with each passing second. When I finally shut the lid, a deafening scream filled the room, followed by a sudden, eerie silence. The presence was gone, or so I thought. Even now, I can't shake the feeling that it's still watching, waiting for another door to open. After leaving Diddy's house for the second time, I thought I had put an end to everything. The oppressive weight I had felt since the day I first stepped into that mansion seemed to lift. Clara reassured me as we drove away that the ritual to reseal the box had been successful. Her team had studied the symbols etched on its surface, deciphering them as protective glyphs designed to bind something powerful. By restoring the objects and closing the box, we had effectively shut the door that I had unknowingly opened. But as the days passed, I realized the peace was short-lived. Though the immediate disturbances, the whispers, the cold spots, the shadowy figure had faded, something lingered. It was subtler now, more insidious, like a splinter buried deep in the skin. The world around me seemed slightly off. Sounds didn't carry the way they used to, as if the air itself had thickened. My apartment, though no longer a stage for overt paranormal activity, felt hollow, like a place abandoned by something that had left a stain in its absence. I returned to my daily life, but nothing felt normal. The smallest things, an unexpected knock at the door, a flickering light bulb, would send my heart racing. Friends began to notice the change in me. Alex, the skeptic I'd confided in earlier, stopped by one afternoon to check on me. His concern was genuine, but I could tell he didn't know how to address what I'd been through. "You've been through a lot," he said, handing me a cup of coffee. "Maybe it's time to talk to someone, a professional." I knew he meant well, but the idea of explaining my experiences to a therapist, someone bound to dismiss it all as delusion, felt futile. How could I articulate the inexplicable? How could I put into words the sense that I was being watched even now? One night, a week after the ritual, I woke up to the sound of something rustling in my bedroom. At first, I thought it was a dream. The noise was faint, like paper crumpling or fabric being dragged across the floor. But as I lay there holding my breath, the sound grew louder, more deliberate. My heart raced as I turned on the bedside lamp. The room was empty, but the carved box from Diddy's house was sitting on my desk. I froze, my mind reeling. I hadn't taken the box with me. Clara and her team had secured it at the house, ensuring it would stay there untouched. Yet there it was, the intricate patterns on its surface catching the dim light. The lid was closed, just as we'd left it, but the sight of it filled me with dread. Summoning every ounce of courage, I approached the desk. My hands trembled as I reached out to touch the box, half expecting it to vanish like an apparition. It was solid, real, and impossibly cold to the touch. I didn't dare open it. Instead, I called Clara. She answered groggily but snapped to attention the moment I told her what had happened. "Stay where you are," she said. "Don't touch it. I'm coming over." When Clara arrived, she brought 2 members of her team. They examined the box with a mix of confusion and unease, muttering to each other about the impossibility of its reappearance. "This shouldn't be here," Clara said, her voice firm but laced with anxiety. "We sealed it. It was contained." As they prepared to conduct another ritual, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. A small crack along the edge of the box, barely visible but enough to suggest that the seal had been compromised. When I pointed it out, Clara's face paled. "It's not fully bound," she whispered. "Whatever's inside is still trying to break free." If you like this video, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Also, could you leave your comments below and tell us? What are your thoughts on my experience cleaning Diddy's house? We want to hear from you. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.